At the age of 14, Franco left home for the city of Toledo, where a place had been found for him at the military academy in the Alcazar. The academy was inspired by virtues to which the young Franco was readily susceptible: duty, honor, courage, and patriotism. And, saying it all, it had its own heroic anthem as well. The new cadet was so small and his voice pitched so high that he became the butt of college bullies, so frail of stature that he was obliged to shoulder a cut-down rifle, humiliations he bore with stoic resolve. Franco was diligent, but he revealed nothing to suggest that here was a leader in the making. It was no surprise that when he completed his studies, Franco passed out a mediocre 251st of 312 cadets. The year was 1910. Morocco, a pitiless land where Spain had been enmeshed for centuries. But this remnant of the empire was the making of the young Franco. Without Africa, he was to say, I couldn't begin to explain myself. Spain was here engaged in a relentless campaign against rebel tribesmen from the Moroccan Rif, fighting to reclaim their lands from the colonial power. In this merciless struggle, Franco was to reveal a quality that was previously undetected. He was not only tenacious, but apparently fearless. His discipline under fire was icy. This, hastened by the bullets that felled so many of his comrades, led to rapid promotion. So severe was the casualty rate that the wounded were routinely left to die where they'd fallen. Surviving the odds, Franco began to seem untouchable. But he wasn't. The inevitable telegram home reported that he had been severely wounded in the stomach. Long afterwards, he told his daughter Carmencita how he had escaped death.
He told me how he was lying in a stretcher and he noticed that they were picking up other wounded and putting them in trucks and taking them off, but they were not taking him. This shocked him, so he called the doctor over. The doctor said, "No, Franco, we're leaving you. We can't take you because you've got a stomach wound. There's nothing to be done. It's useless." My father had a Moroccan assistant, so he said to him, "Give me your gun." The man gave him his gun. He loaded it and pointed it at the doctor and said, "I'm going in the next van. If not, I'll shoot you." The doctor said, "Don't be like that." So they evacuated him.
His close encounter with death gave birth to a legend. Franco was touched by divine protection. He began to believe this himself, while the hardened troops under his command held him in awe. After a tour of duty which spanned 14 years, the mediocre little lieutenant had risen so fast that when he departed Morocco for the mainland in 1926, he had become the youngest general in Europe since Napoleon. Back in Madrid, the 33-year-old general was much sought after, a minor celebrity who even unbent enough to star as himself in a feature film. He had also found time to get married. His wife, Carmen Polo, was well-born and well-connected. Franco's eyes were opened to a very different world from that of El Ferrol and Africa. But the high life never diverted him. As the first director of Spain's new military academy at Zaragoza, Franco reasserted the ancient values of the old empire, the only world he had ever really known. Clinging to that past, he instilled in his cadets his own austere vision: sacrifice for the country, denial of self. But beyond these military confines, the virtues that Franco held dear were now openly mocked. Throughout Spain, the old order was crumbling fast, so rapidly that by 1931 the monarchy had been swept aside and a republic established in its place. A government elected by the people was in power. There was much rejoicing, though not, as his niece recalls, in the Franco household.
The coming of the Republic was a disaster for Franco because it was completely against his way of being, his way of thinking, his concept of Spain. He didn't believe in parties, in democracy, in the vote. He realized the implications of the Republic for his career, and this worried him. In the conversations at home, Franco used to say, "Where is all this going to lead?"
Biography will continue in a moment here on A&E.
Retirement years should be secure years. That's why Merrill Lynch has a gerontologist to help us understand the social, emotional, and financial needs these years bring. That extra insight can make a difference between seeking security and finding it. The difference is Merrill Lynch.
There are many cars built safe enough, luxurious enough, and powerful enough to let you drive to the ends of the earth. But only one that makes you want to take the trip. Presenting the BMW 5 Series.
Most people would jump at the chance. 10 days in South America. But I've done this before. I knew better.
¿Dónde está el teléfono?
This was business, and I was 5,000 miles from home. There was a lot at stake, and I was on my own. Trying to keep my bearings, trying to negotiate, sometimes just trying to communicate. All the while hoping to pull this whole thing off as soon as possible so I could head back.
6-7 million pesos to your bottom line over the next 5 years.
Yeah, I'm sorry, honey. I'm gonna be another day.
My father asked us.
You know, it's funny, being away so long. When you come across something familiar, it can be a pretty welcome sight.
Going home, Mr. Reynolds?
I'm halfway there.
A&E's biography continues.
The new state was indeed fragile, veering perilously between left and right in a deeply polarized nation. In 1934, the tension exploded as the miners in Asturias rose up against the government. With a conservative coalition in office, Franco was summoned to crush the revolt, a task he accomplished with clinical ferocity. 2,000 miners were killed or wounded. Later, Franco was dubbed by the left the Butcher of Asturias. Franco laid the blame for the uprising on Spain's new democracy, not on the extreme hardship that the miners had to endure. By 1936, the political pendulum had swung again. A coalition of the left had scraped into office. Fearing a coup from the right, the new government dispatched those generals it most feared far away from the center of power. Franco was banished to the balmy isolation of the Spanish Canaries, 800 miles away from Madrid. In Tenerife, the new military commander, his wife Carmen, and his only child Carmencita were carefully watched by the loyal Republican authorities. They made sure that Franco's phone was tapped, his mail opened, and his every move monitored. On the mainland, growing social unrest turned into political violence. The government came under acute pressure as a spiral of provocation and reprisal turned into an upsurge of communal hatred. In July 1936, the dissident generals decided the moment had finally arrived to stage their coup and overthrow the government. The planning of the coup was in the hands of General Mola. Because Franco was such a hero in Morocco, Mola assigned him to lead the uprising there. The rebels had already made contact with sympathizers in London to hatch a scheme designed to force Franco's hand. At Croydon Airport, a plane was chartered to ensure that if Franco relented, he could be flown from the Canaries to Morocco on the eve of the uprising. On the 11th of July, the Dragon Rapide left for the Canaries. To avoid landing in Spain, they had to take the long route. And, to avoid suspicion, they were required to land on Gran Canaria rather than Tenerife itself, where Franco was under such close scrutiny. But Franco was still reluctant. Indeed, with the plane en route, he sent a coded message to the rebels telling them, "I'm staying put. I won't join you." In Spain, Mola was incensed, insisting that the coup would go ahead regardless. At this point, chance intervened decisively. On the 13th of July, the corpse was found of a leading right-wing politician, Calvo Sotelo. He had been assassinated by Republican police in a tit-for-tat killing. The rebel generals decided to act. Mola cabled his fellow conspirators in code, telling them that the uprising would start on the 18th of July. Now that nothing could stop the coup, Franco had to choose. Carefully weighing the advantage and realizing that no one was safe, he finally declared for the rebels. His problem, with only 48 hours to the deadline, was to reach the Dragon Rapide, which he had just been told was waiting for him on Gran Canaria. Franco was forbidden to leave Tenerife without permission from Madrid. He urgently needed a pretext, which, by fateful coincidence, was suddenly offered him.
El día de mi santo nos fuimos a Las Palmas porque mi padre tenía que
On my saint's day, we went to Las Palmas because my father had to preside at the funeral of a general who had killed himself manipulating a small firearm.
Thus, in the death of a fellow general, a perfect excuse to cross over to Gran Canaria. In the early hours of the morning after the funeral, Franco was in the bedroom of this hotel when he received a telegram. Its message: the uprising in Morocco had been brought forward by a day. Arranging for his wife and daughter to be put on a boat for France, Franco slipped out of the hotel to make for the waiting plane. But news of the uprising spread rapidly. Franco was a wanted man. Roadblocks were set up to stop him. Escaping their clutches, he was smuggled aboard this tug and reached his destination by sea. On the mainland, the rebels were in trouble. Instead of seizing control of all Spain, only 2 zones were in their hands. To capture the rest of the country, they were in urgent need of the Spanish Army of Africa in Morocco. But the Straits of Gibraltar were heavily patrolled by the Spanish Navy, which was still loyal to the Republic. Franco, who had now arrived in Morocco, was stranded on the wrong side of the water. Yet very soon, the Army of Africa was on its way to the mainland. On his arrival in Morocco, Franco had cabled for assistance to the only foreigners likely to respond, Hitler and Mussolini. They each agreed to dispatch the planes he needed to mount the first military airlift in history and thus rescue a botched coup from oblivion.
Biography will continue in a moment here on A&E.
For everyone working toward a better future, there's a partner under America's umbrella with a plan for your home, your business, your life. your independent traveler's agent. The Travelers Insurance Companies.
No soldier never dies. Then the only thing we have to fear is fear itself.
All of history, all in one place. The History Channel. It's coming in the future.
Day 2. Details, details, details. They think of everything. After a day of sightseeing, Royal Caribbean had iced tea and juices waiting for us at the dock. Back on the ship, an artist was carving an ice sculpture for the midnight buffet. That kind of attention to detail seems not the exception, but the rule. We could all learn something from the way they do business at Royal Caribbean.
You've got some Royal Caribbean coming.
So I didn't get any justice. I got screwed, big time.
They're the wrong men, presumed guilty until proven innocent.
These few words gave me back my life.
Witnesses can be coerced. Courts can be biased.
They were black, the victims were white.
And evidence like genetic fingerprinting can only right some wrongs.
I'll never believe in the system as long as I live. Never.
American Justice. Tonight on A&E.
If you buy a Honda Accord DX for over 14 grand, here's just a few of the things you won't get.
When Franco flew into Seville, the reluctant rebel was greeted as the savior of the uprising, the most renowned general on what became known as the nationalist side. On the eve of his offensive, he elected to send a message to the outside world, voicing the narrow certainties that he was about to impose on Spain.
Thanks to the thousands of souls who followed our movement in defense of civilization, and thanks to all those who hear this word to spread them all over the world. Country, religion, family, this is our aim and strength. Viva España.
Country, religion, family. The bare words gave no clue to the true nature of Franco's crusade. Spearheaded by Moorish troops who had an unrivaled reputation for barbarism, Franco's Army of Africa headed north, under the field command of his close colleague, General Yagué. The rebels crushed all resistance.
The advance of General Franco's columns is pushed on remorselessly. White troops and Moors, well armed and trained in modern methods of warfare, supported by powerful artillery, overcome the resistance of...
Madrid was the destination. But then Franco suddenly diverted his troops to a city which had no strategic significance, but great symbolic meaning. Here, in the Alcazar of Toledo, scores of nationalist families were trapped in the cellars of Franco's old academy in conditions of terrible privation. Under siege by Republican militia, their rescue was a matter of honor, and, for Franco, a chance immeasurably to enhance his own prestige by exploiting a drama which had seized the imagination of the outside world.
Toledo. Through the ruins of the Alcazar stormed the relieving troops, and the garrison is saved. Men who had given up hope of life, who had received the last rites of the church, who had determined to die fighting rather than be taken alive, meet their deliverers.
This was the moment of truth flashed around the world. Franco to the rescue. Except that Franco was not even there. When he did arrive, these scenes were elaborately restaged to portray him as Spain's man of destiny, which indeed he had now become. Within days, there was more news. And yet again, image and reality were sharply at odds.
In Burgos, the seat of the Spanish rebel government, there is a big crowd for a big occasion. But General Franco has arrived on very special business. And amid the plaudits of the multitude, they go inside to the old palace, where he addresses the leaders of the rebellion assembled to hear him. He is nominated head of the state, and his friends again embrace him on the appointment.
What has now emerged is that just before the liberation of the Alcazar, the rebel generals had left the war front to meet on this hacienda near the city of Salamanca. Here they appointed Franco as commander-in-chief, or Generalissimo as he became known. But Franco wanted political power as well, and to achieve this, his supporters lobbied for a further meeting. Foremost among them was his brother Nicolas, who was now to play a decisive part in Franco's meteoric rise. Sure enough, just after Franco's coup de théâtre at the Alcazar, Nicolas laid on a welcome for his brother to impress his colleagues as they returned for a second meeting. Back on the estate, they used the family dining room as their council chamber. After much heated discussion, they agreed to give him supreme political power, but with the crucial proviso that this was only for the duration of the war and that he should stand down once victory had been achieved, which they expected in a few months' time. Even this limitation was not enough for one or two of the elders. General Cabaneus, who knew Franco only too well, confided later how he warned his colleagues of the Generalissimo's vaulting ambition.
You don't know what you've just done because you don't know him like I do. If, as you wish, you give him Spain, he's going to believe it is his, and he won't let anyone replace him either during the war or after, until he is dead.
The decree was taken to the rebel headquarters in Burgos for printing. But in the published document, the crucial proviso had been omitted from the text, to the astonishment of those who thought they were in the know, like Ramon Garriga.
At their meeting in Salamanca, the generals drew up a document which contained the phrase saying that Franco would be their leader. But at the end of the war, he would cease being leader. This phrase didn't appear in the published document. The mystery which remains today is who took the phrase out of the document. The most likely is Nicolas Franco.
The case against Nicolas has since been powerfully reinforced by his own son, who told us that his father had indeed tampered with the final draft. The palace coup had been skillfully accomplished. There was no rival strong enough to challenge the fait accompli without undermining them all, and the generals were urgently needed back at the front. So much for the myth that Franco assumed supreme power only to satisfy his colleagues. When Franco came out on the balcony to address the crowd out there, he knew what they did not, that he was now, in effect, their dictator for life. Henceforth, Franco ceased to be a mere mortal. He gave himself a grand medieval title, Caudillo, appointed by God to save his country. Proclaiming that his was a holy crusade, he shackled the majesty of the Catholic Church to his cause. He molded the competing factions among his followers into a single movement. The salute, the uniform, and the anthem, all the trappings of a fascist state. The Caudillo now surrounded himself with the full panoply of power, including a ceremonial guard of Moorish troops. But he was not yet the ruler of Spain. Constitutionally, he was a traitor against a republic which still offered fierce resistance. Behind the facade, Franco's position was not nearly so secure as it seemed. To win the war, he needed more weapons, more men. So yet again, he turned to Hitler and Mussolini, urging them that his crusade was theirs as well.
Biography's look at the life of Franco will continue in a moment, but first, let's see what's coming up later this week on Biography.
In his crusade to cleanse Spain thoroughly, the Generalissimo sought to annihilate the enemy not swiftly, but by attrition. At first, his strategy bewildered the Germans and Italians upon whose support he relied so heavily, but they soon detected a hidden purpose.
The German generals were frustrated because from their point of view, Franco advanced too slowly and with too much precaution. They thought that it would have been easily possible to win the war at least a year earlier if he would have done it according to normal strategic rules.
By dragging the war out to secure the absolute submission of all Spain, Franco cost his nation dear. After 33 months of unremitting conflict, the country was devastated. Casualties were in the hundreds of thousands. Many more were homeless and hungry. Thousands fled into exile. A divided nation had been broken asunder. By the spring of 1939, the timid child who could hardly hold a rifle had an entire people at his feet. Now, at last, he would unite Spain in the fear of God and restore a decaying empire to its former splendor. A few months later, the 1,000-year Reich was on the march. Franco was mesmerized by the scale of Hitler's ambition. Years later, when he wished to be regarded as one of Europe's great statesmen, the truth about his ambition in this war was elaborately revised to conceal some highly embarrassing evidence. Today, most Spaniards recognize that Franco had some sympathy with Hitler. Very few of them know that it went very much further than that.
Dear Führer, at the moment when the German armies under your leadership are bringing the greatest battle in history to a victorious close, I would like to express to you my admiration and enthusiasm and that of my people. I do not need to assure you of how great is my satisfaction in rendering to you at all times services which you regard as most valuable. With the expression of my unchanging friendship and regard, General Franco.
There was cold calculation in that flattery. In June 1940, as the German panzers scorched through Europe, the caudillo thought to realize his own imperial dreams in the slipstream of Nazi conquest. With France under occupation, and Britain sure to collapse as well, Hitler would soon have all civilization in his grasp, or so it seemed to Franco. In the late summer of 1940, he dispatched his brother-in-law Serrano Suñer to Berlin as his personal envoy.
Der Führer empfing den Abgesandten General Francos, Innenminister Serrano Suñer, zu einer längeren Aussprache in der neuen Reich.
Serrano was instructed to inform his hosts that Spain would enter the war on Germany's side in return for aid and weapons and a goodly slice of North Africa in which to recreate the Spanish Empire. The Germans were unimpressed, as Franco's envoy discovered in a humiliating encounter with the Nazi foreign minister.
And Ribbentrop gave Serrano Suñer the feeling that he is, after all, nothing but a German puppet. Hitler wasn't very much interested in the moment of what Spain would need to enter the war.
Franco had overplayed his hand, but was undeterred, telling his brother-in-law to persevere, that the rebuff should be blamed on Hitler's underlings, not on the Führer himself. Serrano duly made a speech, recorded by the Germans, but later suppressed by the Spanish. This evidence was only discovered very recently.
España falangista de Franco trae al Führer del pueblo alemán su cariño y su amistad y su lealtad de ayer, de hoy y de siempre.
A few weeks later, Hitler was on his way through France. His final destination, the Spanish border, to meet the caudillo for himself. The fortunes of war had shifted somewhat. If he could secure the right deal with Franco, then Spain might now be of use to the Axis in taming Britain.
Hitler thought it is Franco's duty now to be on the German side, thanking for all what Germany did for Spain and for Franco personally.
In Spain today, there's a myth that Franco approached the meeting with Hitler utterly determined to ask for the impossible and thus keep Spain out of the war. The evidence is otherwise. The two leaders met in Hitler's carriage. The official records of what they said exist only in fragments. But the only survivor of the meeting insists that Franco was quite ready to submit Spain to the ravages of the Second World War, so long as he could secure his precious empire in return.
Hitler,
Hitler, being who he was, says, after all these pleasantries, now let's get on with business.
Ahora vamos a lo nuestro, a nuestros asuntos. Y hizo.
Hitler made a triumphal speech that the war was already won, that it was only a matter of time.
Es cosa de muy poco tiempo. Entonces ya Franco empieza a decirle.
Then Franco starts to tell him, okay, fine, I'll come into the war with you if you give Spain this.
Me concede para España todo esto.
French Morocco, Oran, and territories as far as Ifni.
Hasta Ifni. Y mientras Franco se está cansando.
And while Franco wore himself out for an hour and a half talking about these protectorates, do you know what Hitler was doing? He was yawning.
At
the end of the meeting, both were annoyed. Franco was annoyed because he was not getting what he was convinced he would get. Franco had hoped to go home and say, I'm bringing you an empire, but he went back with nothing.
After an exhausting session, the meeting broke up. Unable to pay Franco's price without jeopardizing other priorities, Hitler departed for Berlin.
Hitler was furious, and he said he would prefer to have 4 teeth extracted better than to have again a conversation with Franco in such a way.
If Franco's purpose had really been to keep Spain out of the war, you'd expect him to emerge from the meeting delighted. He didn't. As it became clearer that the Nazi victory was to be somewhat postponed, Franco was careful to shore up his relations with the Allies by preserving a formal neutrality. But in 1941, the first contingent of 47,000 men was sent to fight beside the German army on the Russian front, where in Franco's own words, the blood of our youth is to mingle with that of the Axis. The Blue Division, along with vital raw materials, submarine bases and intelligence facilities, symbolized a commitment to Germany that only wavered towards the bitter end. By 1945, and with the exit of the other two dictators, Franco found himself isolated. In the eyes of the world, one fascist too many.
Biography will continue in a moment here on A&E.
Catholic monarch over elaborate displays of public homage. The outside world, he declared, is not important. We are looking to the inside.
Quizás lo que más le impresionaba de los reyes católicos fue la unidad.
Perhaps what fascinated my father about the Catholic kings was the unity of Spain, because they are the kings who unified the different kingdoms. It was the period when Spain was greatest.
But behind the mask of unity, there was another face to the caudillo's absolute authority. Today, only the traces remain of an episode that has since been wiped from the official memory. On this barren plain called Castuera, there was once a concentration camp, one of many to which almost 500,000 Spaniards were consigned after the Civil War. José Hernández was an inmate here. His crime? He fought for the Republic against Franco.
Había 70 barracones.
There were 70 huts in this direction with the corresponding streets. This was a trench so that we wouldn't escape. Over there was the barbed wire. The camp was a square. In each corner, there was a machine gun. We were 12,000 or so people in the camp. The treatment was terrible, sleeping on the ground with nothing, no food, even less water. During the day, they didn't shoot anyone, but at night they tied prisoners together in a long chain and led them to the mouth of the mine. They pushed them, and with the weight, they pulled each other down. If anyone remained alive, they would throw in a hand grenade. While we slept on the ground, we would feel the explosion. Tonight, they have departed, we thought.
In this repression, even Franco's followers admit that some 30,000 Spaniards were killed in the 5 years after the end of the Civil War. Others put the figure nearer 200,000. Then and thereafter, hundreds of thousands of suspects were filed with military precision, a library full of the names and numbers of Franco's enemy within, atheists and liberals as well as communists. And then there were the Masons. The Masons drove Franco to distraction.
No ha habido en nuestra nación ninguna rebelión ni conato de traición contra la patria que no se fraguase en la sombra de las logias masónicas. Y aún hoy, liberada España de esta carroña, todavía esas insignificantes manejadas políticas, por mucho que se disfracen, obedecen siempre a la intriga y a la oculta inspiración de los masones expatriados.
Franco's loathing of Masonry was so obsessive that he even built his own Masonic lodge as a permanent reminder of this particular descent into hell. With pathological care, he assembled all manner of bizarre relics, symbols for him of Antichrist and anti-Spain, from which the fatherland had to be rescued. Like communism, therefore, Masonry was outlawed. Franco presided over a judicial system in which the ultimate penalty for subversion was death. Nor, despite the claims of his apologists, did he shrink from taking the final decision himself.
The legal head of his office would bring him death warrants with an explanation on each. Franco would sign them while drinking coffee after dinner. This man brought him the papers and Franco signed them. This one, yes. This one, no. These are very harsh words, but that's how it was.
Franco decreed that a noble monument be constructed in which to honor those, and only those, who had given their lives in the Civil War for his vision of Spain. The mausoleum would be hewn from the rock within the bowels of the earth, in what would be known as the Valley of the Fallen. Among the laborers, who numbered 20,000, was an army of Republican prisoners, which toiled here for 20 years, so that in Franco's words, they might redeem themselves through work. To overshadow his bleak vision, Franco devised a great cross, higher even than the Eiffel Tower. But even his soaring vision could not long survive an economy that was crumbling at the base. Franco was in urgent need of support from an outside world which had consistently rejected his overtures.
Spain displays its colorful pageantry for the president.
In 1959, the leader of the free world set foot in a country which had been ostracized by the democracies. But this was now the Cold War. Spain offered a strategic foothold against the Soviet Union. And my enemy's enemy is my friend, even if his name is Franco.
Generalissimo, ladies and gentlemen, let me assure you of my satisfaction that at long last I have fulfilled an ambition of mine almost of a lifetime, to come to Spain, to Madrid, and to see the Spanish people.
For the caudillo, Ike was vital prey, and Franco knew precisely how to beguile him, as the president's interpreter on that visit vividly recalls.
This whole gigantic avenue was wall-to-wall people pressing out into the middle of the street. From end to end of this avenue, which must be several miles long, and it was an extraordinary impression. Darkness was falling and the people were shouting.
Franco had orchestrated this welcome to impress upon the president that this happy land should now be welcomed back openly into the fold of civilized nations. Operation Ike was the celebration of a long process of hard bargaining between the two countries, each wanting what the other had: US bases on Spanish soil in return for American cash.
General Franco said, "You have been able to see the welcome and how the people of Spain feel about you." And he said, "We have a feeling of common interests, we have a feeling of common problems and common adversaries, the Soviet Union."
If Ike was happy, so was Franco. Courtesy of America, Spain was now to join the club of Western nations. At last, Franco could begin to relax, to cultivate a different image. No longer the crusading caudillo, he was now benignly paternal, protective of his Spanish brood. And it was much easier now that he presided over an economic boom, which he barely understood, but for which he never failed to take the credit. But behind the genial facade, the politics of repression, which Franco certainly did understand, was still in force. Elsewhere in Europe, the 60s ushered in a new age of social liberation and political protest, but not in Spain, where a police state still muzzled the expression of free opinion. Inside the Pardo, Franco spent long hours in his cinema, reliving the epic tales of Spain's glorious past, and with his own home movies, basking in the illusions of the present, complete with his very own soundtrack. The manner of his ascent to power, the real nature of his totalitarian rule, could now drift out of focus. Instead, a kindly old man could reflect on a mission fully accomplished in the name of his maker.
Franco thought he had been sent by God. And I think he never doubted that he was sent by God to save Spain. This is why I think he died in peace, because he was totally sure of that mission.
Franco died on November the 20th, 1975, at the age of 83. His remains lie buried under his own cross in the Valley of the Fallen. The imprint of this one man is indelibly engraved on the history of Spain. The Spanish people have now rejected that past, but still today they find it too disturbing to reflect on its meaning for themselves and their nation.
Today, years after his death, Francisco Franco still casts a long shadow over Spain. And yet, despite his unpopularity among many historians, there are those who argue that, in a sense, Franco is one of the most successful public figures of the century, in that he was a man who accomplished nearly everything he wanted to. Now, here's what's coming up on our next